Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be covering with you some of the forage trials that we have as part of the eFields program, looking at some different annual crops that can be incorporated as a forage crop or a cover crop into a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. This year we had 6 different forage trials, 3 of them looking at winter annuals, 1 looking at an oats nitrogen rate trial, and 3 looking at summer annuals. The Winter Annuals Forage trial was actually the same trial conducted at 3 different locations in the southern part of the state, the central part of the state, and the northern part of the state. This trial included sewer rye, triticale, wheat, hybrid rye, and barley. Unfortunately, the barley did not overwinter very well at any location or really germinate very well at any of the locations. So we don't have very good yield data on the barley. We did submit a few samples for forage analysis to determine what the quality of that crop may have been for its nutritional value, but we don't have yield numbers on the barley. The other 4 crops we harvested at Feeks 10.0, so when the crop was splitting the boot, and at Feeks 10.5, so just before the crop would start to pollinate. At all locations, the planting date was late September, early October, within about 7 days of each other, and at planting they received 20 pounds of nitrogen, along with a treatment of 2,4-D to control the weeds in the area. The crops were then at green up, given another 50 pounds of nitrogen. Looking at our data, it may have been valuable to have applied additional nitrogen to these crops, but we don't know if that would have increased yield or quality because that wasn't the factors we were studying. With harvest, we harvested each crop at that growth stage. So each species was not harvested on the exact same day, but harvested on different days based on the growth of the crop. So when we look at the different crops, down at Jackson, sewer rye was the first crop to mature across all locations. Followed by a day or 2 later, hybrid rye. The sewer rye and hybrid rye both matured rapidly, going from 10.0 to 10.5 in less than a week. Triticale was about a week later than the sewer rye, and the wheat was a week and a half later. Triticale and wheat both took about a week and a half to go from 10.0 to 10.5. As we look across the Jackson location, you're going to notice some significant declines in quality across the crops, especially in crude protein. So crude protein was significantly better at that early harvest and declined by the second harvest. But you'll notice wheat did not actually significantly change by that second harvest. It went from 9.3 to 8.9. Across all locations, we find that wheat is a slower maturing crop and also declines slower in crude protein. You'll notice for energy or TDN, cereal rye and hybrid rye had the greatest energy values at that 10.0 harvest and declined rapidly into the 10.5 harvest. When we look again at, say, wheat declined though in energy, unlike in protein. You'll also notice looking over at NDF, the NDF is significantly greater for all crops after heading, but yield definitely increased by waiting from 10.0 to 10.5. One thing you need to consider as a producer is what are the goals for this crop? Am I looking for maximum tonnage or maximum quality in my forage? We gained about a half a ton at Jackson by waiting another week to harvest each one of these species. When we look at the north central location, again, crude protein was not significantly different across any of the crops at the 10.0 harvest, but did significantly decrease for all the crops at the later harvest date. Wheat had a significant decline and actually, interestingly, became the lowest crude protein at this location, which was a little bit strange. Wheat usually doesn't decline that much, but at this location, it wasn't significantly different though than in the rye or triticale, but the hybrid rye maintained its quality a little bit better. When we look over here at tonnage, triticale was the highest yielding crop, had the highest tonnage at that 10.5 at about 3 tons and 2 tons at 10.0. It actually had significantly better yield than any of the others. And we often see this, some other trials we've done in previous years, rye is the highest yielding early on, and then it gets passed by the triticale. One of the challenges and reasons to look at multiple species instead of just planting one is this is the one day we went out to harvest at the north central location. The crop was at that perfect growth stage, but the field was flooded. It took about 4 days for that field to really dry up and firm up enough we would have been able to get harvest equipment across it. And at that point, we may have gone from that 10.0 quality to 10.5. That rapid decline in quality of these winter annuals can be a real challenge. The last location was the northwest location up in Wood County. This location, you can see we did take forage barley samples. We didn't have yield samples because the crop we didn't have good growth, but we were able to get some quality samples. The barley was the highest nutritional value crop. Again, at this location, we see that same trend. Higher nutritional value early on, but increased yield later. We do see lower tonnage at this spot. So the other two locations both received 8 to 9 inches of rain in March and April. Northwest only received about 5 inches of rain and had about 300 less growing degree days. And when we look at these crops, they remove a decent amount of nutrients. So we're removing about 40 to 50 pounds of nitrogen, 5 to 10 pounds of P2O5, and 18 to 50 pounds of potassium. We also had a few summer annual trials looking at corn, soybeans, oats, sorghum Sudan, and BMR sorghum North Central. Those yields range from 1.5 to 2.5 tons. But one thing to notice, these all received about the same amount of nitrogen. The oats definitely had the highest crude protein, but another striking thing here is soybeans. We had soybeans in the trial. They had the highest crude protein while they were the lowest yielding. Soybeans may be an option for you to consider as a forage crop in that double crop situation if you have seed. We had one other summer annual trial down in Morrow County looking at oats, teff grass, and sorghum Sudan. The teff grass and sorghum Sudan had about 1.25 tons of yield. The oats did have higher crude protein, but a lot lower yield. The nice thing about teff here in this study would have been it's much easier to make as a dry forage. That 11% crude protein and same yield as sorghum Sudan may make teff a crop to look at. The last trial we had was looking at nitrogen application to a forage oats crop. Nitrogen really seems to matter on these grass crops, especially with a later planting date. So this trial was planted the 1st of September, and we looked at 3 different nitrogen rates, 0, 46, and 92 pounds of nitrogen. And when you look across here, nitrogen not only affected yield, but also affected crude protein. Without any nitrogen, crude protein was 9%. With nitrogen, it went to 12.5. And then when we look at yields, we only had about 1/4 ton without any nitrogen application, and we bumped up to a little over 2.5 tons with that 100 pounds of nitrogen applied to the oats. Some of our other trials in previous years of eFields work have showed that 50 pounds of nitrogen on August planted oats appeared to be enough. But last year, we also saw this trend where September planted oats maximized yield and quality with 100 pounds of nitrogen applied. Possibly, a little bit cooler soils. We need a little bit more nitrogen because we're not getting as much out of these soils. This later planting date also says 60-day harvest, which is common with many of our summer annuals. We had about an 80-day harvest till harvest for this oats crop.